Hi there, my name is Renee and I am a good enough mom. Now just over a year ago we moved a little way out of town to a slightly larger property in order to become more self-sufficient by starting a small homestead. Now I must just add that our homestead is more like a hobby homestead. It is quite small in that it's only about half an acre in size, and my husband works full-time and I'm also homeschooling 2 of our 4 children. Neither my husband nor myself grew up on a farm, so we've got absolutely no farming experience, and each step of the way has been a learning experience for the both of us. We aren't reliant on our homestead for our income, but we would like to try to reduce as many of our expenses as we can, especially by producing as much of our food as possible. The only time we have to work on projects around the homestead is in our free time, so that's why I think it's much better for us to call it a hobby homestead. We have been living here for just over a year now, and there are actually quite a few things that we no longer need to purchase from the grocery store. So there are some areas that even in the short little while and with the small amount of time that we have to be able to work on our homestead, that have been able to make us more self-sufficient in the way we produce food for our own family. And I'd like to share those areas with you today. Eggs. Now this is the bit that I'm actually the most excited about. If you were to ask me why did we choose to move out of town, then the driving factor would have been to get chickens. We weren't allowed to get chickens in town, and so this was one of the main reasons why we chose to move slightly out of town into a more agricultural area where we were allowed to keep chickens. Now we are basically able to produce all the eggs that our family requires. We currently have about 8 chickens, 6 of which are hens. It is now the middle of winter and we're still getting about 2 eggs a day, and I'm hoping that in the summer they may be laying some more. We also have 11 quails, 9 of which are hens, and from the quails we get about 4 to 6 eggs a day. Now quail eggs are really small, but about 3 quail eggs is equivalent to about 1 whole chicken egg. Now we eat our quail eggs round about the same way that we eat our chicken eggs. We use them in baking, we fry them, we scramble them, we boil them, just the way we would do for a chicken egg. And about 3 quail eggs is equal to 1 chicken egg. And seeing as we get about 4 to 6 quail eggs a day, that is equivalent to about 2 chicken eggs. So all in all, we get about 4 eggs a day. Now 4 eggs a day is not quite enough for a family of 6 to be eating eggs for breakfast every day. But it is enough with a little bit of planning and rationing to eat eggs for breakfast at least twice a week and have enough eggs to be used in cooking and baking that we would usually do as a family. There are some times that I do need to buy eggs. For example, if someone in our family is having a birthday and I'm having to do a lot of baking for a party, or maybe we get guests that come and stay with us, and then there wouldn't be enough eggs for all of us. But all in all, for most situations, we have enough eggs for our whole family on a regular basis. Because neither myself nor my husband come from families where we had chickens, this is something completely new to us, so we decided to just start with a few chickens and a few quails, and we are absolutely loving having them. Chickens and quails are such lovely pets to have. They can be so friendly, and my children are loving having them as pets, and that they give us eggs as well is fantastic. So I'm really hoping that in the spring one of my chickens becomes broody and we'll be able to hatch out a whole bunch of little baby chicks, and then we can have more chickens and more eggs so that we can supply our entire family as well as birthdays and guests with eggs. Wood. Now being self-sufficient in wood is the area that my husband is most excited about. Both when we lived in town and now we use wood as the main fuel for heating up our house. In town we had a very big fireplace in our main living area, and we used to order truckloads of wood every winter in order to keep our house warm. And even now, out here on the homestead, we have a small wood burning stove, and although it uses less wood, we would also have had to order wood if we didn't have wood freely available here. Now we do not have a lot of wood on our property, but our property is part of a much bigger farm, and there is a lot of invasive trees here on the farm. And the farmer is very glad for us to go and chop down these trees and to use them as wood in our fire. And now we have a much smaller wood burning stove, and it's used to heat up our living area as well as to keep the kettle boiling during winter. So whenever my husband has a little bit of free time, he takes out his chainsaw and walks down the road and cuts down a few trees, and the rest of the family go along and we all pull them back to our house. And we've also arranged with the farm workers that if they're ever out on the farm cutting down trees, they're welcome to come and bring it round to our property instead of taking it all the way to the dump. And that works out really well for them as well as for us. Now this has saved us a lot of money for heating our house in comparison to what we used to pay for heating our house when we still lived in town. Mulch. Following on from firewood is making mulch. And I can use the same wood that I've been speaking about in order to do so. We are in the process of busy setting up big vegetable gardens as well as a food forest, so I'm really trying to increase the fertility of my soil. I'm trying to do that by adding a lot of organic material into my soil, and the main source of organic material for me is wood chips at the moment. When we lived in town, I would have to purchase a lot of wood chips to put on my vegetable gardens. But now, after my husband has chopped up as much wood as he can for firewood, that which is left over I can put through my shredder and make mulch with. At the moment, I'm busy using most of the wood chips as pathways between my vegetable beds. And as they break down and turn into compost, I'll be putting them on my vegetable beds for compost for the future. Vegetables. Now, after just 1 year, we're not at all self-sufficient with regards to providing all the vegetables our family needs from our garden. But even so, there are quite a few vegetables that I no longer need to buy from the grocery store. Now, obviously, these are the very easy to grow vegetables, but I'd like to share them with you. And it'll also be very dependent on where you live. But here where we live in quite a temperate climate, there are quite a few vegetables that we are now self-sufficient in. Firstly is salad greens. Now, we have planted a lot of different varieties of lettuces in our garden, and they do supply us with lettuce for most of the year. But we also use a lot of different other types of plants as our salad greens. Things like spinach and herbs and beetroot leaves and sweet potato leaves we can also add to our salads. So there's never been a time that I have needed to buy any type of salad green in this past year. Herbs. Now, even when we lived in town, I had a lot of herbs growing in the garden, so this is something that I've actually never needed to buy from the grocery store. The type of herbs I've really loved to grow is basil and rosemary and thyme and lavender and oregano and mint and things like that. They grow really easily and we can use in a variety of dishes. Tomatoes. Now, this is also something I almost always have growing in my garden, and we live in quite a temperate climate, so even though it's the middle of winter at the moment, I still have tomatoes growing in our garden. The past few nights we've had some frost, so the leaves of the tomato plants have all withered away, but the tomatoes are still fine and they're growing, and we're able to pick them every now and again when we need tomatoes. Please excuse the way my tomato plant has been staked. You see, it did have a tripod initially to start off with, but then one of my children decided that they needed a stick to be used as a sword, and the first stick they found was part of the tripod that was supporting the tomato bush, and I have just not put the stick back again. So at the moment my poor tomato bush is being staked by a tripod with 2 legs, and that isn't working very well. There was one time that we were short on tomatoes, and that is when we were free-ranging our chickens, because our chickens loved our tomatoes. And so for quite a few weeks and months, we never had any tomatoes, not because my plants weren't producing tomatoes, but because the chickens were eating them all before we got the opportunity to eat them. During the summer, when we had a lot of tomatoes growing, I decided to make a lot of tomato and onion sauce. This is something that we use quite often in many dishes in our home, and so I froze a lot of tomato and onion sauce and keep it in the freezer so that whenever I need a tomato and onion sauce, I can take one from the freezer and I don't need to buy a tin of tomato and onion. And this has saved me a stack by preserving all those tomatoes for tomato and onion sauce even throughout the winter. I don't think I'll have quite enough to last until next summer though, but it has saved us a lot of money this year. Potatoes. This year we harvested a whole stack of potatoes. I do think that this has been the most rewarding vegetable for me. This is not something that I really ever planted beforehand, and it was so exciting to dig them out from underneath the ground. We've just finished the last of our potatoes, and our potato harvest lasted us about 6 months. So although we were not self-sufficient for a whole year, it has lasted us for quite some time, and I do hope to be planting a lot more next year. I did keep a lot of the small potatoes to be used as seed potatoes for this next year, and I'm going to be planting a whole bunch more so that it can last us a bit longer. We also always have radishes. This is the fastest growing vegetable at all. It's not something that we ever really used to buy when we weren't gardening, but it can be used in quite a variety of ways, and we're still learning all of its uses. But this is something we can definitely harvest the entire time, and whenever I plant a few seeds or seedlings out, I make sure to always put a few radish seeds next to them in the ground, and I know within 6 weeks I'll have a bunch of radishes ready. Seasonal vegetables. Now throughout the seasons we've had a whole bunch of seasonal vegetables that we were able to eat until we could no longer eat them anymore. We had enough for ourselves, but not quite enough for preserving them, or I didn't quite know how to preserve them. So we haven't been able to eat them now throughout the winter. The one very prolific vegetable during the summertime was marrows. All sorts of different varieties of marrows that we were able to eat marrows with almost every single meal and to share them out with friends and families freely because we just had so many. But it was something that I haven't yet learned how to preserve, so that is my plan for this summer, is to learn how to preserve all my marrows. At the moment, now that it's winter, I can see we are going to have a lot of peas. Now snap peas is something that we also don't usually buy in the shops. Not because we don't like them, we absolutely love eating peas, but because they are so expensive. And now we can eat like kings all winter long because they are so easy to grow, and we are really looking forward to that.
Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. So now for the real deal.
So if this life was the easiest life that one could live, then everyone would be doing it. It would be great if all of us were self-sufficient. But I do realize that this lifestyle is not for everyone. The one thing is that you really need to love being outside. Now I love gardening, I love being outside, I love pulling around trees with my husband to help cut firewood, and I love doing big projects and building things. But I realize that that's not something that everyone wants to do in their free time. And the other drawback of moving a little way out of town is fuel costs for transport. We knew that our expenses with regards to transport were going to increase because we still have to go into town for work or to take the children to school or for sports and activities. So we knew that we were going to have to spend more on petrol or gas. But we didn't realize that the cost of fuel would increase quite so much as it has in this past year. So we definitely have been saving in some areas, but there have been some areas where our expenses have gone up. But all in all, we don't regret moving out of town at all. We've loved the change in our lifestyle. I love it that our children can grow up in this environment, and I love being more self-sufficient with regards to our food. It just gives us this little bit of assurance in this uncertain times that we're going through at the moment. Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Bye!